All right, very good. We're live here. This is Michael Boese with Chris Well. We're going to be doing a little extension of a podcast that we launched this week. And the podcast was called How to Get Publicity and Other Media Coverage. It was in an interview format. The podcast is Marketing Without the Marketing. I'll put links to the show notes in the chat box here so that you can get that. I thought I'd introduce myself so that you have a little context here, and then I'll allow Chris to do the same. Like I said, my name is Michael Boese. I run a small media and consulting company. Basically, I help small businesses with all things content strategy, help them build an audience, use their content efficiently, and just gather attention, trust, and build relationships with customers or future customers so that they can convert them ultimately. I have a lot of fun with this. My clients do really good work, and it's just a blast. I've been doing this for about 2 years or so. I run a podcast, like I said, called Marketing Without the Marketing, which is my attempt to sort of go a little bit wider with all the stuff that I learned from the field in working with clients live. And I do teach a college course on the topic at Emerson College here in Boston. And this week I had Chris Well on the show, and Chris was talking about something I don't talk a lot about, which is using traditional channels to get publicity. Chris works with authors, but this would work for small businesses as well. Chris is a longtime media expert, and we've known each other for a little while now, and he's just really great and just great advice, great content all around. And Chris, why don't I give you a chance to introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Chris Well. I'm the editor of DIYauthor.com and instructor at DIY Author University. I'm also an author. I publish as a private author. I publish mysteries and suspense novels. I'm also in the process of writing, publishing my first book for DIY Author, and that is, in fact, here's a mock-up.
Oh, you got one?
For authors. Yeah, well, it's literally, I printed out the cover and put it on as a jacket. So this is not the book, but Publicity for Authors, 7 steps to get media attention without hiring a marketing team.
Excellent.
So that's who I am. That's where I am.
Excellent. Well, why don't we talk about, just jump right into the topic. Why don't we start with the first question, because I thought this was a really good rubric. I mean, the idea here that just talking about publicity and content marketing, the thing that was great about our conversation, Chris, was just how similar the process was. How similar the process was between publicity and content marketing. Now, I know content marketing really well, but publicity, getting PR, getting the media to cover your business, that's not something like I said, I spent a lot of time in, or I don't feel like very much of an expert, which is why I had you on. But how similar the process was in that, it starts and ends with really good content that tells a story. That was the same for both publicity and for content marketing. That you'd go in with a clear strategy based on a very specific set of goals with segmented audiences. I really love that. And the big thing that really came across when you and I talked before was just, it's really about providing value to them, right? Mm-hmm. Not doing it for yourself, not being self-serving. And of course, that's a hallmark of content marketing. And I love to see that, at least in your approach, that you look at publicity the same way. I just thought that was really cool. So, but you also had a really good rubric, your 7 steps, right? You had a 7-step process for how to get media coverage without hiring a marketing team. Could you go over that?
Sure. Maybe I didn't mention this earlier, but I think this kind of helps frame the list a little better, is that I've actually spent 30 plus years in the media. I was in publishing. I was in, print magazines, print newspapers, broadcasting. So over those 30 years, I was the guy that you were pitching. I was the guy behind the desk that comedians, inventors, musicians, recording artists, filmmakers, all of these people were coming to me and saying, how can I get to your audience? And so these 7 steps are built out of both my experiences on that side of the desk, but also my experiences as an author, then trying to connect with other editors and other producers and content directors. So that's it's sort of driven by both sides of that conversation. So the list, in its pure form, the 7 steps are: get your press kit in order, make your contact list, tell a story, tailor your pitch, share the right information, follow up over time, and then plan for the future. So, we discussed these in the podcast episode. Do you want me to just go? You want me to break these 7 down at this point again? What would you like?
Yeah, I think so. I think that would be good, just because I thought this was really important, because this is a rubric for someone who wants to do this on their own and not hire a publicist. And not to say that you have to, that you don't need a publicist anymore. Publicists are still valuable, but they're also costly. And if you're just getting started, or you're self-publishing, or it's a brand new business, look, the cool thing about the shift to digital is that you can do this stuff yourself, but you need a plan. You can't just go in there and expect for people to pay attention to you. If you build it, they will come is a total myth. You got to do the work. But I like that your framework allows for that. So it'd be great if you dig into that a little bit more. Yeah,
the way I like to when you talk about whether or not you need a publicist, it's sort of like, if you want to learn guitar, you can teach yourself, or you can hire a guitar teacher, but you don't have to hire the guitar teacher. Maybe he'll help you get there faster. Maybe she'll help you get there faster, figure it out, show you some shortcuts. But the fact is, you don't need that person. Or if you're going on a hike, you don't necessarily need a trail guide. You can, if you have a map, if you have the tools, you can find your own way on that trail. But the tour guide might help you get there faster and more efficiently. So I think of publicity the same way. Yes, you might want to hire somebody, but the fact is, you can, in today's media environment, do it completely yourself. For the cost of an email, for the cost of a PDF, the cost of a phone call, you can do your own publicity. So to break down then the 7 steps. So step 1 was get your press kit in order. So you need to have materials on your website before you have these conversations, so that when I, as the editor, if I hear about you, if I get your pitch and I think, oh, that's interesting, or maybe I hear you on another podcast, I see you on, if I see you in the media somewhere else, I might say, that sounds like an interesting story. I'm going to come to your website. You need to have materials on your website already, so that when I get there, I can figure out quickly who you are, what you're about, what the product is, like in the case of an author, what the book is. In the case of a business, this is what you do. This is what you have to offer. And so that information needs to be on your website ahead of time, before you're even contacting these people. And then the second step is to make your contact list. So you need to think of who your ideal audience is, and then you find the media that is talking to that audience. So if you write a particular kind of fiction, if you have a business that appeals to a particular demographic, well, what newspaper is that demographic reading? What podcasts are they listening to? What television programs are they watching, etc.? And so you want to find that media, and then you also want to find the person that is the right person at that media. So, if you want to be in somebody's column, you need to figure out who that columnist is.
Right.
Or you need to find out who the segment producer is, or et cetera. And then once you have your contact figured out, you need to tell a story. So as we mentioned, this is where publicity and content marketing have a kind of a shared philosophy. You don't pitch yourself. You don't pitch that you exist. You don't pitch that you have something to sell. That would make you an advertiser, and they're going to ask for money. If, when you watch a show, a talk show, when you listen to a podcast, it's never about this person has a product, let's talk about that vacuum cleaner. It's this person has an amazing story, or this person has tips. Tips like here's a list of ways for the audience to be healthier. Oh, here's our expert who happens to have this product or who happens to have written this. This is why he's the expert or she's the expert, is she wrote this book. Mm-hmm. But the story is, I'm offering something valuable. I'm offering, a list of ways to save money, a list of ways to be healthier, a list of ways to celebrate a particular holiday, etc. And then step 4 is to tailor your pitch. And so many people, when they get this far in the list, they think that they're collecting these names to start mass emailing people until they bludgeon them into doing a story. Every pitch needs to be to a specific person. So, whereas the press release as an item is written so that anyone that wants it can get it off your website, the pitch is a phone call or an email or a letter to a specific person. And it is so it says, calls them by name, quickly within a matter of words, convinces, like if, again, me as the editor, says my name correctly, spells my name correctly, convinces me that you have read my publication or listened to my show. You don't lay it on thick, but it needs to be, I'm pitching something that your audience will be interested in, and you need to be sincere about that. And then step 5 then is share the right information. So you need to share enough information that I can make an informed decision about whether you're a good fit for my audience, but then you also don't send too much. I don't remember if we went into this on the podcast, but in the book and when I teach this class, many people will want to attach large files to emails, for example, or if they send something in the mail, they'll send, everything. They'll send the whole manuscript, or they'll send, reams and reams of paper. You need to send just enough information that I can make an informed decision, and then you don't send other things to confuse the matter or that I have to dig through. And then in case of attachments, especially, your email could never reach that person because, the IT department doesn't know you. They don't know that you're not trying to get into the system or something, or the file's too large for their inbox or something. Over the years, I've had many examples where somebody sent me a large file and that led to problems. And then number 6 is follow up over time. So you can once or twice go back and say, did you receive it? What did you think? Or we had a conversation. Are we still doing something? But you don't harangue this person. Really, once you've asked once or twice, then you're done with that conversation. So when I say follow up over time, I'm saying you already need to be thinking down the road that you're going to have a different story, a different opening remark, a different excuse to cover your book or your product or your service. In fact, what I recommend to students is you want to, in the course of a year, you want to probably have 6 different ideas for excuses to interview you or feature you in some way. So that every 6 to 8 weeks, if you haven't heard back from that person or that person, that particular pitch didn't work for that person, when you go back in 6 to 8 weeks, you're going back with a completely new story idea. So you're not...
Glad that you make the distinction there. That's important.
Yes, because you don't want to drive them crazy. If they aren't interested in that pitch, you're not going to browbeat them into being interested. So when you go back, you're not nagging them. You are in fact starting a brand new conversation. And then number 7 is plan for the future. In that, as you build a online portfolio, so to speak, so that on your website you have your materials that you already created, but then over time now you're adding, here's a link to this interview, here's a screen capture from this article, here's I scanned in this newspaper or magazine or newsletter, and so you are building this portfolio of appearances that you have made in the media, because each time you're in the media, you have now been vetted. So that the next time you go to the media, you're no longer somebody who's never been. Now you're a person who, I was interviewed here, I was interviewed there, I was featured here. That builds up.
Huge.
And that brings you credibility. I'm sorry?
Huge thing for social proof.
Exactly. Social proof.
And, the thing that I like about that is just, well, the quote that you had from the podcast that we did was, it's better to, it's almost more worthwhile to have been on the Today Show than it is to be on the Today Show, because you're just building a portfolio in real time of all these appearances. I mean, if someone thinks highly enough of you to have them on their show, or to publish an article that you wrote, or to do whatever, to give you access to their audience, it's social proof, right? Because that person, whoever that is, however big his or her audience is, they've said, I think you will be valuable to this audience. And that in and of itself has value to it, which is great.
Yeah. And you don't know who's watching that show or listening to that podcast or who reads that magazine. And so there are going to be other editors, other producers, other reporters and columnists who will see your story or hear you. Like, you didn't pitch them, you didn't contact them, they saw you somewhere else. And then that's where the cycle comes back around to, this is why you need stuff on your website, is complete strangers are going to eventually start showing up your website looking for that stuff because they saw you somewhere or heard you somewhere or read about you somewhere.
And that you make a really important point there, because think about that. If you have done what you're supposed to and you've reached someone new in your audience, someone who doesn't know a thing about you, it really tells you, think about when that person shows up to your site, to the page that you give them, whether it's a landing page or your home page, it had better be welcoming to that person or they're going to leave, right? That you get 3 seconds, some would say 4 seconds, depending on, for someone to land on the page, make a quick assessment. Am I going to stick around? Does this site offer me value or not? That's the decision they'll make right up front. And if you haven't told them that in very clear terms up front on your website or your landing page, really that's your fault, not the person's fault, right? So very, very clear. Let them know what it is that they need to do. So in other words, a very clear call to action. Tell them who you are, what you're about. And you know what? If you've done that and they still say no thanks, that's fine. As I always say, I'd rather have a no than a maybe. Right? Where it's like, okay, I know this is not for me. Great. Thank you. That in and of itself, I always talk about providing value. That in and of itself is a little bit of value, because it's just, thank you. I don't need to hunt around and waste my time. I know you're not for me. But on the other hand, if it is for them, think about that. That site should be there to welcome them, and then to start sort of moving them past the awareness stage to the next stage. What can I provide value with them now? So in other words, can I give them a blog article? Can I give them a video? Can I solve some problem for them? And a great example of how you've done that, Chris, is just, for instance, you have this, you're talking about the 7-step process, how to get publicity, is just having the checklist so that you can create a free press kit. That thing's free. Here, I'll post it in the message box here so people can have the link. But, that's a good thing where it's just like, look, you may not have to buy the book yet. You may not have to hire Chris as a consultant. But look, Chris has given you this checklist, which allows you to start creating your own press kit. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that'll give you everything you need to do for free to go and get started. Or, maybe you need more help. Maybe you need to dive in deeper, get the book. Maybe you need more help and you need to hire Chris in particular. Maybe you need more help and you need to hire someone else in particular. The point is that what you've done here is good content marketing, and just saying, look, here's this thing, take it, hope that it helps you. I genuinely hope that it helps you. And that really, in essence, is content marketing, providing value upfront, making the first move without any expectation of a return. And, and this stuff is good. It's very soft touch, and it's very effective if it's deployed properly.
Now, why don't we flip it around for a second and now go in the direction of more content marketing, because, as you've mentioned, your clients are businesses, you teach content marketing. And so we've talked about kind of the shared philosophy between publicity and content marketing. But okay, now that we've gotten to the point where I've done publicity, somebody's come to my website, well, that would be where content marketing would take over, wouldn't you say?
Oh, most definitely.
What would you consider if an author's watching this and they've gotten to that point where they've gotten somebody to show up at their website. From a content marketing perspective, what would you consider like the top 2 or 3? These are the things that have to be there to really present yourself.
No doubt. I think that really just having them have a place where they feel like, okay, I belong here. I get this. And think about this. For a lot of the small businesses and authors that I work with, many of them are just getting started. So I basically just say, hey, look, even if you are, really what you need is the very, very basics are a website and some blog, and then some sort of social mechanism so that people can reach you or be able to share things via those. But let's talk about the website. In its most basic form, this can literally be a 1 or 2 page site, right? So your website, your front page with a clear statement of purpose. What are you there for, right? So in other words, answer the question that the audience member, the reader, the user might have, which is, why am I here? Why am I on the site? Answer that very, very quickly in as few words as possible. Use an evocative image if you can that creates a feeling, but very, very basic. That's about it. Then you need an about page. That's okay. I'm interested. I think I'm in the right spot. Who are you? And there are different ways to handle this. I tend to use a much more personal approach and tell what it is about me and my writing and all that. But for companies, you just have to tell a little bit about the story, just so that, I mean, look, you're trying to create trust. No one's going to believe you at this point if they're just meeting you, your self-reported version of yourself. But it's a start. Here's sort of the why behind it. Here's what I do and why. That's important to people. And then beyond that, it'd be good too, and I tell this for whether it's authors or small businesses, your first blog pieces, and the reason that you want to blog, of course, is that you can focus on narrow topics, keep it nice and tight, they're shareable, they answer a particular question, and that's basically how I advise anyone to start if they're starting a brand new business, is to start with your customer or your prospects, whatever it is, the 6 most common questions you get. Because if you get those questions over and over again, wouldn't it be great to have that perfect answer, the best articulated version of that answer available via one link? You don't have to keep repurposing it over and over again. You just send that one link to someone. But also at that point, if someone's on your site, they might be able to continue getting to know you through your writing. And that doesn't have to be writing, of course, as you know, Chris. It can be a podcast. It can be a video. It can be a variety of different content, whatever it is that you use to connect. In the business world or for authors, that tends to be blogs. And, you just make them start to answer their questions, start to make them, in other words, start to give them value as they're there. Now, the only exception I would say to that, and I feel like this is a little bit more advanced, this would be sort of the 201 course, would be to set up an actual landing page, right? So if you were a guest on someone's show, and we could do this on the podcast that we just recorded or whatever. So suppose you have been granted an interview, you do a television appearance. One thing that you could do is on your site, set up, like for instance, mine would be michaelbosey.com/appearance or whatever. Be very particular. So /DIY author if I'm on your show. And then when then you give that link out during you put it in the show notes if you can. Sometimes you won't control that media, but certainly when you tweet about it, you can give them that link. They show up there, and then think about this. Now this is really syncing your content. This is what I would call a content strategy. You've been on the show, so that link is somewhere. Someone can see the appearance, and now they're coming to your site. But now you're treating them with very, very tailored and specific content for that person who's come from that other site, from the show, to your site. Now you welcome them. You make the assumption that they've at least seen the presentation, the interview, whatever it is that you've done. And now they have a little bit more context. So you should speak differently to them, right? It should be tailored at that point. And if you do that, I mean, like I said, that's a little bit more advanced because it means you have to have a special page just for that. It doesn't have to be in your menu. It doesn't need to be, but having a specific landing page for each appearance can be really good because that person who's coming from that outlet is different than a person who just shows up generally or via Twitter or Facebook. It's not different from the same thing you talked about.
By the way, the lights. Sorry.
No,
it's very lovely what you're saying.
Well, it's not different from what you were talking about tailoring your pitch to the particular outlet, right? Where you're saying, let's get really specific so that it's not just me talking to people in general. It's me talking to you, Chris, about your particular needs. What are the things you need for your audience? What can I do to provide value to you? Right. And all of this is what I think is just amazing about content marketing in general, using the web for bi-directional conversations rather than just this sort of spray of outbound content, is that you can do that. You can really segment your audience. You can talk to them using their language, in their voice, and really start to get these sub-segments of your audience. Sometimes that sub-segment is one, like what you're talking about, pitching an outlet. But sometimes they're sub-segments, the sub-segment of people who have seen this video. We bring them to this landing page and we talk to them differently. It's really powerful stuff.
Now, in terms of the content you make for your own website, how much weight do you put on with your clients, whether it's text or video or audio or infographics, slides? I mean, there's all these options. Is there a hierarchy of which ones are going to build that relationship faster with a new person?
Yeah, it really, here's the kind of cool thing about this. The answer is no, or at least in my estimation. But the cool thing is that it's not up to you. It's up to your audience. Okay. Right. So if there's two sides to the coin, right? One is if you are not comfortable doing audio or, for instance, recording videos, don't do it, because it's just going to create friction in the process. Meaning, if I hate doing video, I'm not going to want to do it. Next time it's time to record, I'm going to put it off. I'm going to make excuses. I'm going to procrastinate. It's not going to get done. For me, it tends to be, I do largely writing just because I'm a writer, and podcasting because as a musician, I'm also very, very comfortable recording and editing audio. Those two things are very low friction for me. They're things I can do easily. It's not to say that it's not a lot of work, obviously, but those things are easy for me. Whereas video, maybe less so. Mm-hmm. But so you got to pick something that's really comfortable to you. And for, if you're working with authors, obviously the cool thing about that is, hey, guess what? You're a writer, so you can do this. So usually folks are starting with a blog. But I do work with, CEOs or CMOs at small companies who they're terrified of writing, or they're not good at writing, or they don't think they're good at writing anyway. So sometimes I might help them with that. But you got to do what's comfortable for you, but also think of, the audience who you're speaking to. Where are they? And I always advise clients, and we do this through a process, to try to test, start with some assumptions, test some channels, some social channels that you're in, and then seek to eliminate them. So if you can do a blog, for instance, that's one thing. And then maybe you find that your audience is really on Twitter or in LinkedIn. And that's really been the case for my business, to be sure. Okay, that's great. So, it's not to say I don't still do Facebook or Google Plus or whatever, but I just, I de-emphasize that a little bit. But if your audience is really looking for advice on, let's say on YouTube, for instance, then you need to be there, right? So you were mentioning all these things that you could learn, like learning how to play guitar, for instance. Think about that. Mm-hmm. There are millions of videos of people teaching how to play specific songs or music theory or whatever. There's tons of things that you can do on YouTube to learn guitar. And if that's where the audience is, think about that. The format's got to fit the content. I mean, you could do that via audio, but of course, with teaching someone something, video is really effective, and certainly for that medium. So those guys pick video because it makes sense. Can you imagine trying to do that in blog form? I mean, you could, but it'd be harder to connect. So
Right.
I guess I always just say whatever makes the most sense with the content, and then of course with the audience, where your audience is. So that's really important. And let's see, there were a couple other things, unless you had a follow-up there, Chris, that I wanted to dig into on your 7 steps.
Okay.
The thing that I liked was you were talking about presenting. All of this was sort of getting really specific for folks. The person who is at the media outlet that you hope to attract, and trying to help them make an informed decision. And you talked about story, and you talked about sort of why, trying to picture what their audience is. But could you go into a little bit deeper piece of that? Because really, when it comes down to it, if you're trying to get publicity, you're depending on someone else's media outlet. So you have to get through the gatekeeper, which means, of course, you can do all this work up front, but still, if you don't get a yes, you're not in. So could you go a little bit deeper into how do you make that decision? How do you get that to a yes more effectively or efficiently in your estimation?
Well, the first thing is once you make your list, you study the outlet. So you listen to a few episodes or read a few issues or whatever that is, so that you really do understand, whether they do reviews, whether they do interviews, whether they have columns, what those columns are. Because the very, very first thing about contacting this person is not to say something right up front that makes it clear you have no idea what they do or what this, you assume that they're a great fit, but you've clearly never read or listened or watched. Like I was the editor for a number of years at a website that was about fiction, and I would be contacted by publicists, book publishers, authors, and they would pitch content that clearly we don't do. And we had a digital magazine that was free, so it was very easy for them to, on our website, click the button, download the thing, flip through a single issue, and you would know we don't do the thing you're asking.
Right.
Or you would know, or these emails that I would get as the editor that said, well, I don't know, who to contact. It's like, well, in the magazine, there's my face, there's my name. Obviously, I would be the person to contact, or this is this columnist, or this is that columnist. So you really want to know this is the right fit for you, because you've watched it, because you've listened to it. And you really, it's not like you have to sit down and take a lot of notes. It's as simple as, this, if you're pitching a morning talk show, if you watch it one time, you're going to see this is a segment that they have. I would be a great fit for that segment. So your pitch is, so you figure out the segment, then you figure out who's the segment producer, or who's the contact person. And it's not necessarily the host of whatever, unless it's a very small outlet, like a podcast that a single person does, or, a very small media, small town, small market media. You're going to assume that there's a person. The gatekeeper is not the person on camera or the person writing the article. The gatekeeper is going to be somebody that's in the credits or in the staff box.
Good point.
So you go to the person who's in the staff box, and you identify this segment or this column or this department, and you say, I have something that would be a great fit for that department. And then you present something that actually would be a great fit. And so that really is also the trick. You're not going to lie or assume or try and, force your way through. It needs to be, I would be a good fit, which is why I'm going to claim that. And then you demonstrate in a matter of sentences, a matter of words, really. You say, this segment, this is what I'm pitching. I have, your audience wants to know about, your audience is raising small children. I have 10 tips for getting your kids to read more books.
Right.
Why am I the expert? Because I wrote this book on this topic. I wrote a parenting book, or I wrote, whatever. Or if you're a person who, you write Westerns, and so it's fiction. Well, maybe the topic is these are things I learned research in the Old West, so I can talk about, and same audience, the differences between raising kids in the Old West and raising them today. So it's still the same audience, the same interests. This is you now finding a way to bring your book or your message into that conversation. So you don't necessarily introduce a conversation nobody's having. You find conversations that they are having or that they are clearly interested in those conversations. And then you find an entry point to say, oh, I can say something interesting in this conversation. And, oh, look at this. I have a book.
Mm-hmm.
And so the book comes sort of afterward. Or in the case of your clients, the product or the business comes afterward. It would be, this is the value I have. This is the conversation that I am entering or that I have something interesting to say. And the reason I am an expert is, I sell vacuum cleaners, or we have this service, or we have this product, or I wrote this book, is why I have a right to be in that conversation.
Right. That's excellent. What I like about that too is you're talking about, and we didn't discuss that on the podcast, was just the distinction between small media and larger media, right? And the thing that I always say is just now with the realm of social, and I mean, look, everyone's a media producer now. Sure. I mean, every business is, and that means that even small players, even a small audience, it can be effective because you have the ability to scale now. So it doesn't have to be these large traditional outlets anymore that. Because it's not the only game in town. And, some major media outlet may have millions of viewers, readers, whatever. But think about it. If you have someone who has a podcast and they have 1,000 devoted listeners who listen to every single episode, who are very active, and you can reach those thousands of people. I mean, look, just because a cable network or any other large media outlet has tons of viewers, for instance, doesn't mean that they're all actively engaged. They're, in point of fact, it might be a very low percentage. But the fact is, those 1,000 people, if they're really engaged, they may actually do better for you because they may be, because they're engaged, be sharing more, be doing more advocacy on your behalf. And so it just shows you that, it's worth it now. Before it wasn't, to have these sort of little hand-to-hand, because basically the media was so centralized, it really wasn't that valuable.
Right. And even going back to what we discussed we compared mass media versus niche media and kind of the value of going after the smaller media. If we just compare, because the example used in the podcast was, I think it was the Today Show. And then if we compare that with yesterday, I appeared as a guest on your podcast.
Yeah.
So if I were on the Today Show and the book I'm peddling is about publicity, well, already only a fraction of that audience would even possibly be interested. And even those people, because I'm on for 4 minutes, and then they move on to the next segment where it's a dog with a hula hoop or whatever. But during that 4 minutes, the audience, a fraction of whom may even possibly be interested, most of whom have no interest whatsoever, are eating breakfast or fixing breakfast or chasing the kids to get them up to the school bus, or all of the things that people do in the morning when a morning show is on that does not, the morning show is the wallpaper. They're not actually paying attention during that 4 minutes. But on your podcast, which doesn't have Today Show numbers, I was on for 20 minutes talking about a topic that your audience is far more likely to be interested in.
Right.
And so I had a better opportunity to lay out my case, talk about my story, talk about what I had to offer to that audience. And there's going to be way more value in terms of that connection. And so granted, if I could say I've been on the Today Show, well, there is value in that. But even that, it's not going to be somebody that, oh, I saw that. That's never going to happen. It's always going to be, oh, somebody who didn't watch it, but, oh, I've heard of that. But in your case, because your product, and also 4 minutes, it's gone forever. It's in a vault somewhere.
Right.
The podcast is on demand.
Absolutely.
So when I say I was on a podcast, even people who have never heard of you will say, oh, that sounds interesting. I will follow a link and listen to it right now.
Right.
And it's on my phone. It's on my tablet. It's on the computer.
But by all means, not only that, it's delivered right to a device. using for it for
Right.
So people are getting this who don't know me or don't know you at all, just by virtue of the fact that they're on iTunes. So,
right.
All right. Well, Chris, I think we should wrap up now. Not for any other reason than the fact that I need to move on to my next meeting. But here's what I'm going to do. Let me post before I close up the recording here. Let me post a link to the podcast. It was called How to Get Publicity and Other Media Coverage, interview with Chris Well. I've given a link to the show page there. I mentioned before and posted a link earlier on about Chris's free checklist. That's also on that show page if you want to go right there. Or if you are listening in via iTunes, just bounce to the to this link right here. That'll take you right to my show in iTunes, and this one right now will be listed as the first one since it just published on Monday. Like I said in the show notes, always love to get comments, feedback, questions. So if you got a question for either Chris or me, you can hit us up either there on the notes, and I'll make sure that, I respond to everyone, but I'll make sure that Chris gets it too. Or you can hit us up on Twitter, which I think you can get through Blab here, but mine is mbozzi, that's MBOEZI, and Chris is at DIY Author, so that's at DIY Author, AUTHOR. And it's been a lot of fun, Chris. I appreciate you being on the podcast and then doing this special session to go in a little bit deeper. It's been really a lot of fun, so I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. I appreciate it.
All right, so we'll close it up here. Thank you, everyone, and hope to do this again soon. Bye now.
Bye-bye.